Hello everybody, welcome back to Shannon's Shelf. I'm sitting in my car today. You'll have to forgive me if that bothers you. I'm sorry. We're just going to be doing my top 10 today, and this is where I could get some quiet space, I guess, a quiet environment. I'll give you guys, I guess, when I get my monthly update out, more background stuff. I don't really want to take away from this video, but we're just going to go dive right into my top 10 books I read this year. I read about 84, that sounds right, books in 2024. And so these are the 10 that I narrowed it down to, really, for the 10 best. Now, number 10 would be Testimonies of Transition by Marjorie Harper. You will find I have a good amount of variety in this top 10 because I read, I think, a fair variety of books of different genres and types and such like that. Testimonies of Transition is nonfiction. Marjorie Harper is a professor at the University of Aberdeen. I think she might also teach at UHI to some degree as well, University of Highlands and Islands in Scotland. She's a Scottish academic. Now, this was super interesting. It was mostly just getting straight from the horse's mouth about people who have immigrated from Scotland. Now, most of them ended up migrating back to Scotland later in their life, but I like hearing stuff like this. This is kind of like folklore-esque in many ways. This was specifically dealing with diaspora, like diaspora studies and whatnot, but it was super interesting to hear these people's voices and to hear their experiences, and I just really enjoyed listening to it. I actually have a physical copy, but it's in storage, so I ended up just listening to it, and perhaps I'll reread it when I get my physical copy back. But very enjoyable. And then down to number 9 would be The Wizard Knight by Gene Wolfe. If it's like a little series like this was a duology. I'm just gonna keep it together. I guess in many ways, I'd almost say I enjoyed The Knight, which is book 1, more than The Wizard, although The Wizard, I feel like, rounded that story out really well. But book 1, I think I enjoyed more. I say that, I think, because it kind of just, it's what pulled me in, right? I really enjoyed it. It gave me kind of like a folklore-esque feel, like a mythical feel when reading it, which I feel like most authors don't do that very well. Tolkien might be an exception just because his world is so in-depth, feels so much more real, but Wolfe did it in a different way because I didn't think it was necessarily in the same vein of Tolkien. But I think in many ways it was the language he used, like just the style. It felt like hearing folk tales or fairy tales and stuff that I've heard. So I think I really appreciated that. But when I hear those, I know they're not real either. I knew that was the case here, but I still really, really enjoyed it. I knew there was an extra layer of not being real because obviously this was just a novel. So I don't know. I don't think anyone actually has ever believed this stuff, right? Although fairy tales have often had believers. But either way, Gene Wolfe was great. This was the first time I read Gene Wolfe, and I hope to read more Gene Wolfe next year. And then number 8 will be Wild Pork and Watercress by Barry Crump. Now, this was amazing. I love this book. Super fast read. Barry Crump's a Kiwi author, and he's since passed away. This book was written in the 80s. It's the basis for the film The Hunt for the Wilder People. Super nostalgic feeling, kind of cozy but funny, just entertaining, a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I feel like lots of the mainstream pop reading experiences aren't for me. Some of them are. And I do enjoy Sanderson, and I obviously enjoy Tolkien, and he's very mainstream. But Wild Pork and Watercress is like that fun feeling that I feel like it should be mainstream because this is like, it felt like it had so much more depth and character to it than lots of that other popular stuff. Now, Wild Pork and Watercress is relatively popular, but I think mostly in a Kiwi understanding because I don't know how many Americans have heard of it unless they've heard me talk about it before. By the way, great book. Wild Pork and Watercress was amazing. I actually have not finished his first book, but I'm still in the middle of reading it. That is A Good Keen Man. That was his very first novel, and I'm trying to read more Crumpy because I really enjoyed it. Okay. Well, number 7 is A House Full of Females by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. If you follow my channel, you've probably heard me mention this book before. If you don't, feel free to subscribe and like. But this was more early pioneer Mormon history with especially ties to women's rights and plural marriage and stuff like that. Super, super interesting. I am Mormon, or that is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I read a little bit of theology. I read the Bible and the Book of Mormon frequently, I would say, every day, generally. But I don't usually read too much of that stuff. And I don't think it's necessarily I've been avoiding it. I just haven't bothered in many ways. But I think I'm going to be bothering from now on, because that book was super great. I really enjoyed it. Super informative, super, like, inspiring to me, at least. But either way, I can recommend that book. And then next we have, at our number 6 spot, is The Children of Húrin by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, I read a lot of Tolkien this year, and The Children of Húrin is a great story. Now, I've heard some people say they didn't really like Children of Húrin so much because it's too sad, depressing, kind of like grimdark even. I guess I could see what they're saying. It definitely reminded me of Greek tragedies. That's where my mind immediately went. In a similar vein, Things Fall Apart was a good Greek tragedy, but set in a different environment, a West African environment, and that one actually would be more like an honorable mention. It's not on this list, but great book as well that I read this year. But Children of Húrin was very enjoyable. Highly recommend. Very complete as far as his other stories that were published posthumously by Christopher Tolkien, or with the help of Christopher Tolkien. But I really enjoyed Children of Húrin. Also very quick, and there's a chance I'll read it again at some point. And I don't feel like I often read stories that quickly. Turnaround at least. But into the top 5, we have Nakete Mataronga, which was actually kind of another collection, just like Testimonies of Transition. This was more academic. Jacinta Ruru was the editor for this, but each chapter was just a different Maori scholar or academic working in the private sector, working for government, working for universities, and just giving their experience kind of in line with their disciplinary expertise and being Maori. And I don't think this was like, if you're someone who doesn't like identity politics, which a big part, there's a part of me that really doesn't think it's overblown, but I really enjoyed this. This was super good, super interesting, super insightful, and I liked hearing the various voices. Obviously, they had something in common. They're all kind of scholars, like professionals in that regard, and they're all Maori, but it was super informative, super enlightening. It's good to hear other people's thoughts, people who come from quite a different background. I mean, one thing's for sure, anyway, I'm an American, but either way, super good. Really enjoyed that. That won my best New Zealand book of the year. Wild Pork and Watercress was a pretty close second, and both made the top 10. Number 4 would be The Dialectics of Myth by Alexei Losev. Now, this is the only Losev book I've read. There's only one other book translated into English, although I hope to learn Russian anyway and I can read the rest of his stuff. But this is something that I don't know if I would say this is inspiring or anything like that, but I do think about what he said a lot, and my understanding of mythology and the philosophy of myth is way more deep than it was before reading this book. I read the book like 2.5 times pretty much, just so I could try to understand it better. But super good. The translation I thought was good by Vladimir Marchenkov at Ohio University. He was nice when I reached out to him as well. But Dialectics of Myth, man, like, super good. I'm hoping to read the other book that's been translated into English by him at some point, hopefully this year. We'll see. I'm looking to be really, really busy. But if you're interested in mythology, as like the philosophy of mythology pretty much, and mythical reality and what that means and all these other things, and I can highly recommend reading it. It's kind of expensive to find. The copies out there are. Number 3. Before we get on number 3, I'm just going to mention the honorable mentions here. So these are ones that, this might be a weird place to put honorable mentions, but these are ones that didn't make the top 10, but that were quite close. I already mentioned Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, and that was super good. I read that relatively recently. Of course, I read it this year. All these are new reads for me. None of these are rereads. But also, I would say The Royal Navy in the Napoleonic Age, Senior Service, like 1800 to 1815 by Mark Jessup. It was a history book I read recently. I didn't read too many history books this year, but that one has stuck with me more than the other ones. And that might help because I read it relatively recently, but I find myself thinking about it a fair amount, actually, which doesn't happen a lot, even with books that I did read recently, and I really enjoyed it. Using fictional characters to like deliver mostly just information, but make it feel more approachable, more human, bring it down to that level. So super good. And then Dreamer Awake by Liam Q.D. Hall, I also did really enjoy. It almost broke into the top 10 as well. It's just a short novella, like cyberpunkish, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever thing. And really quick read. Really enjoyed it. Really fun. And I actually do think about it a fair amount too. I can highly recommend that. That's just indie author published stuff like that. More along the fantasy vein, I guess, that some of these are. And I liked it in many ways because it was fantasy, and I've been reading more fantasy because I want to try not to burn myself out to just reading strictly academic nonfiction and whatnot. But I felt like it was one of those books that you could pretty easily put in a critical theory class and have it discussed through a Jungian lens or a psychoanalytic lens, hopefully not a Marxist lens, but something like that, right? And I really appreciate that, right? I feel like you could do that for Wolf. I think you could do that for any fantasy book, I guess, but some I just feel like it's begging for it, right? And that's what Dreamer Awake felt like. So I really enjoyed it. It was a bit more depth to it, a bit more thoughtful in many ways than lots of fantasy I read. So it didn't make top 10, but honorable mention. And the other one I'm just going to mention because it probably would have made this top 10 actually, but I finished it on January 1st, so I didn't finish it in 2024. And that is In the Language of Adam by D.J. Butler. I read 3 other D.J. Butler books this year. None of them are making this list. They're all pretty good. This was like his more theologically focused one, and I am planning on reading his other 2 theological books that I have not yet. But In the Language of Adam, it was phenomenal. I loved it. Mostly liturgical symbolism in like temple ceremonies, pretty much as shown throughout the Bible and the Book of Mormon. He is LDS like I am. But either way, that was great. So I was going to mention that one. It might make the top 10 for 2025. We'll see. I got a lot more books I'm hoping to read this year, so I don't know how the top 10 is going to shake up, at the end of this year. But on to number 3, into the top 3. Number 3 is Kon-Tiki by Thor Heyerdahl. Now, I've seen the film for this a couple of times years ago, not too long, but a few years ago. Film's been out for about 12 years, I think, or something like that now, or maybe 13, I guess, since it's 2025. But adventure story, there is logistical stuff involved here, but he's like putting a theory into practice, and super exciting, super interesting. I think it has credence. It's pretty sound, even if other academics at his time in the 1940s thought he was crazy. And then he just went and did it. Like, what a man. Like, what a bro. And it's so cool. And kind of brave. Almost seems kind of foolish. That happens sometimes. But I really enjoyed Kon-Tiki by Thor Heyerdahl. If you live in Europe, I highly recommend you go up to Oslo. Europe's not that big, guys. Come on. Go up to Oslo and go see the Kon-Tiki Museum because the boat's there. Yeah. And then number 2, we have Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, this almost was number 1, and I've been acquainted with Lord of the Rings for a long time, but I read it for the first time this year, and of course, I'm just including all 3. So good. Kind of that Wild Pork and Watercress I mentioned, nostalgia. Definitely get that with Lord of the Rings. It feels so much more real. I kind of talked about that already with Gene Wolfe, but I loved Lord of the Rings. It was phenomenal. I would almost kind of like to be a annual reader of the Lord of the Rings. I watch the films a couple times a year already, and that's going to continue. We'll see how busy I get, but I loved Lord of the Rings. Now I just really want some nice physical hardback copies of Lord of the Rings because it was so great. I mean, I don't really know what to say about it in many ways. I assume most of you have read Lord of the Rings or I've heard about it a lot because a lot of people that read Lord of the Rings absolutely like worship and grovel at Tolkien's feet. And in many ways, they should. But either way, Lord of the Rings was phenomenal, and that's my number 2 book this year, or 2024, and the best fantasy that I read this year, certainly. Because number 1 is more philosophical. If you follow my channel, you may have heard me mention this before, but that is The Meaning of the Creative Act by Nikolai Berdyaev. So I read a good amount of Russian philosophy this year, obviously translated into English. I did read one other Berdyaev book called Spirit and Reality, which was pretty good, that I read after this. But The Meaning of the Creative Act is so thoughtful, thought-provoking, interesting. I know I definitely don't agree with everything he said. And there was a big part of him that was quite naive, I would say. Just considering the subject matter and what he kind of predicted. But either way, super thought-provoking. Creativity, I think, is hugely important. It's kind of like his own brand of personalism and emphasis on freedom, which obviously is paramount. And then, well, spirit, and that is, all these work hand in hand, right? And creativity being one of them as well. And I feel like creativity is something that is often ignored in our modern world, or not really properly understood. And he goes quite a bit, like, in the other topics on it that I'm like, I don't care as much. Like, he talked about creativity and sexuality, and I was kind of like, okay, interesting. But yeah, super, super interesting. Easily, I would say the best book I read this year was The Meaning of the Creative Act by Nikolai Berdyaev. Highly recommend it if it sounds like something you'd be interested in. And yeah, that's been me. That's for 2024. Hopefully I get another video out soon. Please feel free to like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll get my channel goals out. I might not do my monthly update for December, but I might. It'd be a relatively short video, all things considered. We'll see. I'm just super busy. The new semester started today, so I've just been reading. That's what I was doing here in the car, reading Aristotle's Physics, and what is the other one? A History of Natural Philosophy. So super exciting, right? But I'll see you guys next time. Please have a good one. I hope the new year has started well for you guys already, and that it continues to go well, and that even if you face challenges, that you can come out all the better for them, you know. But either way, hope you guys are doing okay, and I will see you guys next time.